My name is Bacil Donovan Warren. Served in the United States Army. I was a 19 kilo M1 armor crewman, and I was in the Army for 4 years, 3 months, and 23 days. When I think about the word veteran, I've got sort of two things that I think about. One is the straight dictionary definition, which means someone who has experience doing a thing, right? In the social context, veteran, especially in the US now, is virtually always used exclusively to refer to military veterans. I do think about when I hear people talk about veterans, since I know that's what they usually mean, I kind of think about how the connotation of it comes up, but I always in my own mind sort of make sure to distinguish between a military veteran and a combat veteran, because not all combat veterans, or not all military veterans are combat veterans. And sometimes that is a sore spot for a military veteran who didn't go deploy for a combat deployment. And sometimes it's a sore spot the other way for a combat veteran when you lump in the non-combat veterans together. Not all combat veterans are, PTSD having psychopaths. And in fact, most of them aren't, at least not psychopaths. The existence of the general veteran moniker, I guess, to me just recognizes the experience. Somebody has done something and they have experience doing it, right? So to me, it really means just that. It's an experienced person, most of the time a military person, somebody who has military experience. In August of '88, I was in Germany, and we were doing a qualification gunnery for tanks. Tank qualification gunnery, just like individual qualification gunnery. Individual soldiers qualify with their personal weapon, their sidearm, their pistol. For tank crews, it's always a pistol now, or their M16, now their M4 carbine. So you do your individual qualification with your sidearm, whether it's a pistol or an M16 or an M4. But then tank crews also, and the Bradley crews do this, every crew that has a crew-served weapon, they have to do this at some point. Tank crews qualify their tanks. And we do these on what are called tank tables, and you have some tables that you run sort of as practice runs, and then you have tank table 8, which is the qualification table for tank crews. And it's one tank going down. You do some defensive engagements, you do some offensive engagements, and the whole time you're doing this, you've got a radio, a PRC 77 radio that people might be familiar with from Hamburger Hill or any of those Vietnam era movies, We Were Soldiers, because that was the same radio that they had back then as they had when we were doing these tank gunneries. They would attach them to the outside of the tank commander's hatch and then wire them into the intercom of the tank so that they could listen to the tank crews as they were communicating inside the tank during the engagements. And they did that because they were grading us not only on whether or not we hit targets and whether or not we hit the right targets in the right order within a certain time frame, but also whether or not we were communicating effectively using the proper fire commands to communicate, to give the correct orders and all that kind of stuff. So they did that, but it was the only tank table that they actually listened in on for those fire commands. Tank table 9 and 10 are more advanced, and they're for section gunnery, 2 tanks. And then you have tank tables 11 and 12, which are for 4 tanks, and you do the whole platoon, does a platoon fire command and does their engagements, but they don't listen in on the individual tank crews. So when I was in Germany then, August of '88, I was with 3rd Armored Division, and we had the Deputy Commanding General of 3rd AD had this idea that he would combine the tank table 8 and tank table 10 together, and instead of running tank table 8 as a qualification gunnery and then having to do the whole section in tank table 10, they would just do them both at once. So they wired everything up. We did 2 tanks, did it was all daytime engagements. some offensive, some defensive engagements, but they wired them up. Each tank had its own PRC-77 radio so that they could listen in the tower to our fire commands. Anyway, whether or not that worked, I have no idea. The briefing that we did afterwards, I don't remember that part of it. But what happened then, we got to the end of our engagement, and it was the end of the day. And usually at the end of the day, once they've done the last of the engagement or the last of the gunnery runs, no matter what kind it is, you know, they just they do range maintenance. And so at the end of the day, they pop up all the targets and make sure all the targets are working, the moving targets move and the stationary targets don't, and all that kind of stuff. But right before they did that, since we still had some good daylight left, they had some ammo. And they decided to just give us ammunition to shoot because the CO already paid for it, and he doesn't want to have to haul it back or sign over a hand receipt to somebody else for it. It's just easier to just shoot it. So they brought a Hammett down to each of the two tanks. We're all the way at the end of our tank lanes. So they bring a Hammett down and they refill our ready rack on the tank. The tank, M1A1 tank carries 17 rounds in the ready rack. And so we get all loaded up and the Hammets come back down and they clear the range. Everybody's good. We make the range goes hot. And so we battle carry one training Sabo round. And then, okay, pop up all the targets, fire and adjust. And so we fired and adjusted. They gave us 60 seconds to fire off as many rounds as we could fire off. The wing tank, Charlie 1-2, was, the loader on that tank was a guy named Antonio James. And I was the loader on Charlie 1-1, which was the tank that I was in was Charlie 1-1. And we did, both of us emptied the ready rack in less than a minute. He did his 16 reloads in 45 seconds. And I did my reloads in 42 and a half seconds. And he was doing, so his average is 2.8 seconds per round for a reload. Because now they fired 17 total, but one was already in the breach, right? So we only did 16 reloads. But it was 2.8 seconds on that tank and 2.65 seconds for my reload time. And we get done, range gets cleared, everybody's done, so we bring all the tanks back, we park, we offload our bodies into the briefing rooms. At the bottom of the range tower, they have a little briefing room, because they're going to debrief us about the engagements that we did, because we still have to debrief after the tank table 8 part of it. But as we're sitting there, there's this dude, just this loud, booming voice coming out of the hallway. This guy is just stomping through the hall, and he's, where the, sorry. And he's like, where the fuck are my 2 autoloaders? And everybody's kind of, okay, we don't know what's going on here. And it's the Deputy CG, is a 1-star general. He's Brigadier General, Deputy Commanding General of 3rd Armored Division. Walks in the room and he's looking for us. And he was just pleased as punch that he watched 2 of his M1 tank crews launch 17 rounds downrange in less than 46 seconds, right? It was, not only was it less than a minute, but it was 45 seconds or less for both of the 2 tanks. And he was, like I said, the dude was just beaming. And you can probably see how proud I am, because we were busting. I mean, we were humping those rounds. We were excited because it's a mad minute, and shooting tank main gun rounds is what tankers really like the best. And then we know the Deputy CG is watching. We didn't know he was in that tower at that time, but we knew he was paying attention to what was going on. So we had lots of adrenaline, lots of experience, lots of reason to be excited about it and to be as good as we could be, right? So we did that. I wish I still had his coin. I had it. He gave each of us a coin, and it's been lost in one of the moves that I made since probably 1995. But I'm really proud of that, because we were just, it was, in a lot of ways, it was kind of proof that if the Soviet Third Shock Army had come across the inter-German boundary in the late 80s, that they might have had a harder time than they expected. Because, yeah, they got autoloaders on the T-70s and T-72s and the T-64s and T-80s, which is an interesting piece of equipment, but they're not firing rounds every 2.65 seconds. They're not emptying their entire ready rack of ammo in less than a minute. If we're hitting 90% of 16, 17 rounds, 18 rounds, probably because we would have battle carried one and then had the ready rack full. So 18 rounds in less than a minute, that is 4 whole tank platoons, and then both command tanks. Okay, so if you get 90% hits, okay, maybe you're only hitting 14 tanks. But that's an entire tank company from one M1 tank. So he was proud to see that we would probably have at least done our best to hold off a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. I was in Germany 87 to 89, and then I got PCS to Fort Bliss with 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment. And when I first got there, I shot a gunnery. I was like immediately thrown onto the platoon leader's tank of 2nd Platoon. So I was on Cyclone 2-1 as the gunner right from the get-go. And we had like less than a month. We had like 3 weeks of UCOF time to get trained up so that we could qualify for gunnery. Went to gunnery and shot high tank in the squadron. And I shot like I think it was a 992 that I shot on that gunnery range. Because I had done so well, the CO stole me off of Lieutenant Ouderkirk's tank and put me on his tank as his gunner, because that's what commanders do. They take the best gunner and make them their gunner. So I was on his tank for about a year, a little over, I think it was a little over a year, but we did an NTC rotation together. We did 2 tank gunneries, and then we ended up going to Fort Hunter Liggett in California, TDY, with B Troop, Bravo Troop, to do a test bed for the ADATS program. As part of that, so the ADATS, part of what they were testing was how well it did against aircraft, and the aircraft they did both fixed wing, fast movers, and helicopters as well. We didn't involve with the fast movers because the Marines and the Navy guys mostly it was out of Miramar, when they would fly through, everything had to shut down. So we didn't have really anything to do with that. But the helicopters, we were out there for a couple of weeks doing FTX, force-on-force stuff against each other, and then the 101st showed up. 101st Airborne sent a couple of companies, 2 or 3 companies of Apaches and Kiowa helicopters out to do the OPFOR stuff for us, because they were testing the air defense part of that, but also comparing it to how organic air defense of a tank platoon and Bradley platoons, how they work out. And during that time period, once we started to fight OPFOR, so the 101st, their pilots had to pretend to be Soviet era Hind and Hokum, the Mi-24 and Mi-28 helicopters. So they had to act like they were Soviet helicopter pilots. So they did Soviet tactics, and we started keeping track every day, every week, of which tank crews and which vehicles generally got the most helicopter kills. Every day and every week, I had the most, all the time. And after a couple of weeks of being there, we would gone out to the chow hall to eat lunch one day, and there was a little group of the pilots from the 101st, right? The helicopter pilots. And so I grabbed my driver and we got our trays, and we're going to head over to take a seat, and I kind of gestured for him to come over this way. We're going to walk past these pilots, and I asked him really loudly and really deliberately loudly, right next to these guys, hey, so how many helicopters was it that I shot down today? Was it 5 or was it 6? Was it 7 something? And then he comes back, he's like, well, I think it was actually 8. I think you shot down 8 helicopters today. Yeah, you're right, I did shoot down 8 helicopters today, just staring at these guys. Wouldn't make eye contact. They didn't want to hear it, right? These really kind of angry warrant officers with 101st Airborne. And it's just one of those sources of pride. Yeah, I mean, it's prideful, and it's interesting to me because you're not supposed to be able to shoot down helicopters as a tank crew. I mean, we do practice it. There is a gunnery, we do gunnery practice for helicopter engagements, but usually you're shooting at them with the 50 cal, and there is a main gun engagement for it, but yeah, tank crews shooting down helicopters is big news. And I shot down a lot of helicopters. And not only did I shoot down a lot of helicopters, not only did I shoot down more helicopters than the other tank crews and the Bradley crews did, I shot down more helicopters than the ADATs. and I don't think that made their crews very happy. So we're doing a gunnery, and on the 2nd of August of 1990, which was the day that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, we were out on the tank range. Inside the tank, you have an intercom panel, right? We talked about that with the radio for the tank gunnery table. But it's got these little, they're push posts that you can put, you can wire up field telephone, you can wire up a number of other things, headphones, but also a field speaker. We had this one little monophone field speaker that I was hooking up to the intercom system. So we had this break, and not only were we waiting to do the nighttime engagements, but it was chow time. And as the sun starts to set, you start to get the wavelengths of radio can expand, and you can start to pick up AM and other shortwave radio patterns better because they bounce off the ionosphere or whatever. But I was tuning in our radio to the Channel 13 news from El Paso, because you can get the audio transmission of it. If you know exactly where to get it, you can pick it up, right? And so we're out there at the range, and we're tuning in the news, and we're waiting for the chow truck to show up, so we got the speaker out there. And that was the lead story on the news that night, was Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait. And you could, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps now thinking about it, because everybody shut up. Nobody said squat. It was all ears. Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. That's going to be a problem. And literally everything that has happened since then has been sort of seen and heard through a surreal filter, right? It's kind of almost like a foggy sort of a thing. But so that transition, because everything we did from then on seemed to be surreal. So we transitioned our vehicle ID, we transitioned all of our enemy tactics, training, all that kind of stuff. For the first time in my career, I practiced CQB. We took two CQB close quarter battle. We took two teams, right? Cavalry, regimental armored cavalry troops at the time had 4 platoons in the troop, and the troop is a company level equivalent, right? So you had two scout platoons and 2 tank platoons. The tank platoons support the scouts, right? And so they're basically kind of like a half a company each. So you have the first half of the company and the second half. And that's what we did, right? We had red and white platoons, which was the first scout platoon. Second tank platoon was red and white. And then blue and green were the 3rd scout platoon, 4th tank platoon. And so red and white were always fighting against blue and green. And blue and green would go upstairs, and they would set up concertina wire and mines and grenades, and we would have to clear the building. And we'd never done that before. So we had to do some research, figure out what because we didn't know what we were getting into. But also, we needed time. We had to kill some time. Because the tanks, we put them on railheads, right? To railhead our tanks out to Beaumont, Texas, which is where the port was. I've railheaded dozens of times. I have no idea how many actual times I've railheaded tanks. This one was different. Everything about it is through that surreal filter of, this is a tank combat weapon, and I'm going to get on it 10,000 kilometers away, and I'm going to possibly shoot at people who are shooting at me. Everything gets filtered right through that. So anyway, so that change, that surreal filter that kind of falls down over to the front of your thinking and the front of your vision and your hearing, is the kind of one of the stronger memories that I have. But sort of stronger even still was after the start of what the media calls the ground war. Technically, I think it's Operation Desert Saber, which is the portion of the Operation Desert Storm that was done by the ground forces. They had moved our timetable up because they had launched their attack into southern Kuwait, and it was not going as slowly as they had expected. So they moved up 7th Corps' crossing over the LD line of departure. They had moved that up several hours, I think 12, 14 hours, and they moved us up 24 because everything was moving more smoothly and swiftly than they expected. So we crossed the LD, and everything we're doing from that point on is moving. We're awake the whole time, right? So 88 straight hours. I did not get a wink of sleep. We crossed the LD. We ran for the first whole day. We didn't run into anything except log packs. We did refuel, right? Refuel and water. And then after that, second day, we started to run into some enemy pockets of resistance. Most of the time, most of the time when we ran into them, they would fire a shot at us, we'd fire a shot at them, they'd surrender, right? Sometimes we fired a shot at them, they surrendered. Sometimes they just surrendered. A lot of times it was, and especially the very first few groups of enemy soldiers that we ran into, they just looked awful. They were malnourished, they were dehydrated, they were very unhappy. Most of them really had no interest in being where they were, and were kept there by officers who would, point a gun at them or threaten their families, right? So after that, we started running a little stuff for resistance, and our platoon sergeant, after we did our log pack, he said, okay, set up a 75% guard, 25% sleeping, 75% on, right? And so my platoon leader looked at me and said, go sleep. Yes, sir. So I hopped out of the tank, and at the time I was actually the loader on, after I got back from the NTC rehab stuff, or the fill-in stuff, I had been shifted over to 2-1. So I was the loader on the platoon leader's tank for second platoon. And I hopped on the back deck, fell asleep. 30 seconds later, it seemed like, somebody was kicking me on the bottoms of my boots. I was sleeping on the back deck. I had taken my tanker pillow and put it back there. And it was my gunner. And I was looking up, I was like, why the? And he's kicking me on the bottom of my bed. Get the fuck up. Get the fuck up. And I couldn't understand why, until I realized he wasn't the loudest thing that was going on. And it was the artillery around me that had him so fired up. And that I had been asleep for about 120 seconds after having been awake for 88 hours. So I got woken up very rudely by my gunner, for which I am eternally grateful. And so yeah, when he sees I'm up, he basically just nosedives back into my loader's hatch. And I'm hearing and seeing the artillery that's falling all around our position, and I grab my stuff and I'm doing my own swan dive, the loader's hatch, to lock it up. And so then we're pulling out, we're pulling all of our stuff back. But so that's the first time I get to sleep, right? And it was for like 120 seconds tops. And we got our stuff reorganized. We kind of pulled our positions back a little bit, and then we got new orders to move to a different position. We got over here. We did our move, and we got set up. We got our stuff all. The scouts are all out in front, the tanks are all out behind, and we get no more fragmentary orders, right? We are just, this is going to be our hammer and anvil. We're in the anvil position here. We're just going to hold here, right? So they immediately then went to a guard plan, and we took regular guards. We did one radio watch on my tank, and they cycled that through all the NCOs, and then our enlisted personnel, we did a 2-person guard rover around the tank platoon, 2 hours, like 2.5 hour shift each. And my driver and I got the first shift. We were just lucky, worked out that way. We did the first shift, we did our guard rotation, we did whatever, and then we went to bed. And we slept, and this is the night of the 27th. So we got a chance to sleep. I just rolled into my sleeping bag on the turret top, and I was done. Wake up the next morning, we did stand to again. It was like 4:45, something like that. And then we stood down, went to Redcon 1, went down to Redcon 1-, and then we started to do some PCM, some maintenance, work, stuff that was getting kind of lagged behind because we weren't stopping for anything. So we did a little bit of maintenance on our tanks. We did some weapons cleaning. We made sure we had, I was making sure I knew how much ammo we had, because that's my job as the loader, is to know how much ammo there is, where it is, and make sure I tell the TC when we are getting close to needing to do a resupply. So I'm doing all that stuff, and it's about 07:55 local time. We get this announcement over the squadron command net that starting at 0801, there's going to be a 14-minute barrage, artillery barrage, And then at 08:15 hours, there's going to be a ceasefire. Okay, did I just hear that correctly? That we're ceasefiring in like less than an hour, like 20 minutes. Yeah, so 0801 MLRS and 155 millimeter howitzers and 207 millimeter howitzers, they're all going over our heads. Nothing coming inbound, it's all outbound. 15 minutes, 14 minutes of artillery barrage, and then nothing. Just silent. And then there was a lot of noise because we were making it. Because we're screaming and we're hollering and we're hooping and we're woofing and everybody is just letting loose, right? I mean, it's, oh my God, we just lived, right? We've survived. That didn't last all day because it feels like it was 20 minutes, but it was 2 hours. It was about 10:20 hours. We got a Frago come over the radio. Squadron Net came up. One of the Iraqi, there was an Iraqi air defense unit that had shot down an F-16. And then there was a medevac chopper that went to go get them, which I'm going to assume was the PJs, not just Army medics flopping around in a Black Hawk, and they got shot down. So our job was to go secure the crash site, make sure we got the personnel and the equipment, and also take out, you know, whatever Iraqi unit it is that's shooting down our helicopters and our aircraft. So that changed. Right? So now not only do we have this surreal mask, right, this filter that comes down initially, that maybe gets a little cleared up because we've just had this experience of, oh, ceasefire, this is over, we're done. Oh no, you're not done. That transition from elation back into, okay, so from terrifying to elation to, okay, now this is actually even more terrifying because now we just thought we were going to live. And okay, so we got work to do. So we get this Frago and we go to Redcon 1 and it takes, you know, we're, in addition to being now really nervous and scared about what is going on next, we are transitioning back into being soldiers and not just being happy soldiers, right? So, so we mount everybody up, everybody's done, we report that we're Redcon 1, and then we get our order, and we start moving. We start moving east from our position, 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, and Golf Troop. I think it was either Golf Troop or Echo Troop. I'm not sure which, but one of those two was the crash site for the medevac helicopter was in their sector. So they recovered the crash site, secured the survivors and the equipment that was there, and then we continued to march east and did a movement to contact and ended up at Arumalia Airfield, which was where the anti-aircraft fire was coming from. So the scouts kind of crested this very light rise, right? And you couldn't really see it from where you were, but as you barely cross, oh, there's a hell, okay, I see the tower, and now I see the base of the tower and tanks and a Roland anti-aircraft missile system and a Roland anti-aircraft gun system, and there's BMPs, and okay, we know what we're dealing with now. So we get a squadron order to halt. Second squadron, the way that it was set up are sectors, as it were, right? So the squadron, sort of the squadron line between the two squadrons, first and second squadron, basically cut the airfield in half. So they did a quick adjustment and said, okay, second squadron, the airfield is now in your sector. Okay, you plan the hasty attack. First squadron, you guys set up a base of fire. So we kind of readjusted our tanks and Bradleys over here, and we're kind of aiming this way. And so the scouts from second squadron start getting up to the line, and they start running into a minefield and a wire fence. And they're getting up there, but they're also noticing that the equipment that's on the airfield is abandoned. They don't see anybody in the vehicles. And we can see the same thing from where we're at. We got our optics on them. And so the order comes down not to engage. First of all, we got friendlies on the north side of the airfield right now, but don't engage because this may be abandoned equipment. But if you get fired at, or if you see them getting back in, light it up. So the second thing was what happened was they apparently had either heard about us coming up or somebody saw something or whatever, and they left their vehicles and got into the buildings. and then changed their minds, I guess. I don't know. I didn't talk to any of them afterwards, but then they decided, okay, well, oh, they're here, so they got back in their tanks, and that was a mistake, because I don't think I can say for certain that we missed one target, and it was the first one we shot at, and it was because it was a heat round that hit a fence that we couldn't see between us and a BMP that was on the airfield. So Sergeant Planner fired his heat round, and I heard him say it. He said, "Oh shit," because I was in the middle of loading the next heat round, and I asked him about it afterwards, and it turns out that he could see it as it was on the way. He was watching the tracer, and then watched it kind of do this the splay pattern, because you don't see that if it hits a target, that it starts to do the Monroe when you start to get the heat round forms the jet that goes into the enemy vehicle. You don't see that. So he knew he hit something else, and we figured out later it was the wire fence or one of the fence posts or something triggered the heat round prematurely. But he got the second round, and he hit that BMP, and it went up in smoke, and then we hit we were shooting at an ammo bunker. Anyway, so we get through that. We eliminate all of the opposition that's on the airfield. Second Squadron has it under control. While we were doing that, there had been an A-10 that had come down and given us some air support. Apparently, he saw some more vehicles that were dug in to the west, or to the east, about another 1.5 kilometers, 2 kilometers. So he radioed that in, and we got another Frago to continue east to secure whatever this was. So we get up there, we pull up, and the Bradleys start to shoot. They see BMPs, and so they're lighting up some of these BMPs. And we get up, we're kind of rushing up there to catch up because they're way ahead of us. We pull up, our tank, in fact, my tank is maybe 30 meters from this BMP that Red 1 or Red 2 had hit with the 25 millimeter. It was on fire, and nobody was in it. I mean, if there was somebody in it, you know, you could smell that whatever was in it was not human. That was propellant, right? While we were sitting there, we were hunkered down. I was in the loader's hatch. Loader's hatch was open, but I was not up and around right now because we were not sure what was going on. So I was in here ready to load rounds, and TC's up there's got his protective, the thing, hatch protective open. And then we hear just screaming over the platoon frequency. Was the platoon sergeant, and I've got tanks, I've got tanks, I've got tanks. And we were like, what? So I kind of stuck my head up, and there was a T-72. Not even as far away as the BMP was. It was maybe 20 meters away. Dug into the ground in this little, we called them the quarries later, because there was just great big, they just used bulldozers and dug them in like 10 feet into the ground. And it was not just a tank position, right? It was actually a large area, and there were 3 of them near us. There was a T-72 in this one. It was abandoned. There were 2 or 3 MTLBs in this one over here, along with a truck. They were all abandoned. And the only thing that was left was this one that was in front of us. With the BMP, we couldn't see it from the tank because it was flush to the desert floor, right? When we got up, once we got up some height, we can see that, yeah, okay, now we see what's going on. So the platoon leader called back red platoon so that they could help us clear this area out. And while we're sitting there, there's this trailer that's kind of sunk into the side of this hill that they've built up with the sand. And there's this door. Is it the wind? Okay, I'm swinging my 240 over because I'm loader 240. I'm kind of aim it over here and just kind of make sure that's just the wind blowing this. It wasn't the wind. There was a dude in there with and after a while, what I think he was doing was like testing it to see are we paying attention? And he came out the door, kind of burst it open with his head, had his AK in his hand, and he had an RPG on him. And I didn't care at that point. I just, kind of mashed down on the butterflies of the 240. And then my platoon leader's kind of, what are you doing? Why are you shooting? Because I had forgotten to tell him that I was watching this, because I didn't want him to think I was nuts, looking at this door. The wind is open, knocking this door open. Anyway, but that whole transition from being a tanker, being a normal tanker, just going to gunnery, going to NTC, to combat tanker, the surreal filter that kind of got in place. And then it kind of got lifted, and then a brand new huge one got put in front of us after that transition from, being, combat mind to ceasefire mind to, oh no, not ceasefire. yeah, you got more fighting to do. So that probably is the strongest memory for me. The whole thing is kind of weird and surreal. Veterans, military veterans, non-veterans are diverse, right? The people who served are maybe slightly more diverse in some ways than the general population, but they're less diverse in others. There are not every veteran that is combat or not is a diehard right-wing conservative Christian. There are Jews, there are atheists, there are flying spaghetti monster Pastafarians that serve in the United States military. We have black people and white people. We have people who are of Asian descent, and there are men and women. And some of the people who served in combat and have experiences that a lot of civilians would never understand. Maybe there are some experiences that are different, right? I was a combat veteran. I was in Desert Storm. The experience that I have as a soldier, as a combat tank crewman, is different from the tank crewman experience in 3rd Infantry Division on the Thunder Run. It's a different experience, right? I don't have any special insight to what any individual person in that situation actually did. I do know what they were doing because I did that job, and I have some idea what it was that they were going through, but I did not have that experience. By the same token, I did not have the experience of being a civilian at home in 1991 watching this war develop over CNN, right? So the experiences that we have as veterans is just exactly the same, different from civilians as the civilian experience is from the veteran. The veteran should, I would hope, understand that just because a person is not a military veteran and they're a student at the University of Arizona does not mean, first of all, that they're a card-carrying communist, right? Liberal, whatever you want. There are liberals in the Army. There are liberals in the Marine Corps. There are conservatives in the Army and in the Marine Corps. And there are people from all walks of life, rich people and poor people. And the fact that we have certain experiences as veterans doesn't make us better people, and the experience that civilians have had doesn't make them better people either. We are all just people, and we all share that same humanness amongst us, right? Just as people, we need to treat each other as people. I'm just a person. I have different experiences from you. You have different experiences from me. That's all, right? It's still mitochondria in our cells, and yeah, some of us have a little more melanin than others, but that's about it, right?